I think at the board level, what I was seeing, even sort of 6 to 12 months ago was people were interested in hearing what was happening. What are you doing? What are you doing in the space? Now, that is no longer the question. It is what results are you getting? So I think those times have well and truly changed. People are interested in impact.
Welcome to another episode of Advising the Advisors, brought to you by Kenley. I'm Bolu, and today I have the pleasure of being joined by Adamantia Velonis. Ada leads IT strategy at L.E.K Consulting, and with a background at the intersection of law and technology, she leads she guides enterprises in bridging the gap between business goals and IT strategy. Thank you for joining me today, Ada.
Thank you for having me, Bolu.
And how are you doing today?
I am very well.
Lovely. Okay, let's kick it up like high level. Eli 5, can you walk me through your role at L.E.K and what type of organizations you work with and the kind of problems you help them tackle?
Yeah, sure. So I work really closely with our global CIO. So I am working to shape and to deliver our IT strategy for the firm. So in terms of my personal areas of expertise, I really focus on driving digital transformation. So IT modernization. I've also spent some time in my career focusing on go-to-market strategies for professional services firms, so legal consulting. I've spent quite a lot of time designing IT operating models so that you can actually implement on those strategies and also governance structures that go along with them. And then, most recently focusing on leading and selecting, AI technologies and sort of other enterprise technologies and actually helping to support the implementation and adoption into professional services firms. So they're the sort of areas that I focus on. And look, I would say that my approach to AI tends to be quite straightforward in the sense that I think you need to be able to create true strategic advantage, and I don't think you can do that by just sort of dabbling.
Yeah.
And I think over the last 2 years, what I've, seen in the market is a lot of trialing, a lot of testing of different things, but these programs not necessarily connecting back to true strategic, drivers.
Lots to get into there, but just before we do, is there like a vertical focus you have in like the IT transformations, perhaps across like certain sectors, or you see yourself more as like a horizontal player?
More of a horizontal player. I've worked across things like transport, again, professional services technology, which is quite transferable to a lot of different contexts. I think at the end of the day, most organizations are data and knowledge organizations. But no, I do see myself more on that horizontal. Yeah.
Okay, so let's jump right in. You kind of you introduce a couple issues there, and again, in the themes you're seeing in the market on, again, misconceptions or missteps people are making, especially around AI. So yeah, let's start there. What are some misconceptions or common mistake patterns you're seeing in how enterprises are adopting AI or running their pilots as one start before they go to roll out?
Yeah, I mean, as I say, I think there's a lot of focus at the moment on trialing a lot of different things. I think there's a focus on, what is your AI strategy? What is your AI strategy? And I think in my role, I very much see it as having to sort of elevate that conversation and say, well, actually, the question here is not about, how do you implement AI? The question is actually, how do we remain competitive and relevant in 2025 and beyond? How are you actually transforming the way that you operate? So to me, it's not about testing, a whole bunch of different things. It's actually having one or two, decisive bets or decisions that, you really think are going to change the way that you operate and deliver to clients. So I think, when it comes to, some of the misconceptions I see, I think people think that if a pilot is successful, then that means that it's ready for production. Okay. Those two things are not the same.
Definitely.
They are just not the same. So, I think about like operational scaling factors. So, governance, data quality, integration, change management, you need all of those elements in order to scale something. So what I tend to see in terms of, these AI pilots is, They're run by innovation labs. They're people who love technology. Okay, so you see this sort of tool obsession. People want to try a lot of different things because it's cool and it's interesting, but they need to be aligned. You need to align that to a specific business problem that you're actually trying to solve. You can't just be interested in playing with the tool. So I think that's sort of the first issue. Another area that I would call out is measurement failure. I think there is a lot of overlap in this market. There's a huge proliferation of tools and startups, many doing quite similar things. And what I see is that sometimes these innovation labs get stuck in this cycle of testing actually the same sort of functionality again and again and again.
With different vendors.
Different vendors, not being able to make a decision. Again, the market tends to be fast moving. And I think if you don't have the discipline to actually set, criteria and requirements that are allowing you to compare these different solutions side by side, you get stuck in that trap. Yeah.
I'd like you to tell me what you think about this, but I actually have this thesis that, this is a build versus buy dichotomy, but I've actually found that organizations that have actually tried, or not just tried, but actually built, let's say, like proof of concept before, tend to be way more informed buyers because, to your point, they kind of like know what they want because they did like a small POC internally, like, okay, cool, like these are the core capabilities, let's go find a provider outside that can scale with us and, like, again, continue like maintaining frontier. Do you agree with that for a bit? Or what are some other methods of, again, becoming more informed in what you're looking for and building that spec, if you will, before engaging with vendors?
Look, I do think it's a mix of buy versus build. I think with build solutions, you end up having to deal with the run. So you need to be able to maintain a solution that you've built. And I think sometimes people underestimate the complexity and the resource that's actually needed to do that. And so in some situations, it can become more advantageous.
We've touched on AI a bit. So let's go to another like IT 101, commonly used but like seldom understood concept is governance. Like you mentioned this in your intro as to like your field of expertise and interest. What is AI governance to you, or just like maybe IT governance? Because I guess AI is for all of like 2 years old in its current incarnation. More broadly, like how do you think of like IT governance?
Yeah, IT governance is so fundamental. I think it's just critical to innovation, and actually being able to play responsibly. So when I think about IT governance, it really is this focus on change controls. How do we minimize the risk of disruption to the business? But how do we also unlock new capabilities and new features in a responsible way? And that can be anything from the technology itself to the processes that go behind it, and how we're thinking about things like business continuity, how we're thinking about resilience.
I think when we were catching up briefly before, you mentioned how you hinted at like one important way that the governance challenge is unique with AI. One of the points being the decentralization of creativity and creation. Yes, maybe you can speak to that, or if there's any other key theme that you think like makes the challenge more interesting, let's say, with AI.
This is a really interesting point. So I think in the past, you would typically see developer tools in the hands of maybe a data and analytics
Your
team,
developers,
or an internal IT development team. Now with LLMs, you really are putting low code, no code solutions into the hands of your entire workforce. So that is a huge step change from a governance perspective, because your average user is unlikely to have a background in software engineering, understanding development life cycles, thinking through issues like, well, where do I need to design a control?
That was the first time I ever appreciated that like core difference in like, again, IT governance, if you will, in like an AI first world. Like, yeah, everyone is an engineer in some way. Okay, so let's bring it together. So we've discussed the change management a bit, and we've also discussed some of the governance risk. What is the synthesis? Like, what is the relationship between these two things, change management and governance risk? Like, and how do they play together, if you will?
I think one of the really interesting areas is actually around AI use cases. So one of the things I would encourage any organization to do is to actually catalog the AI use cases. Because by doing that one activity, you are going to deal with risk and governance, and you're also going to deal with strategy.
I.e., do you like let everyone just like run away, do their own thing, and then see what works? Or should you have top leadership stakeholders gather in a room together and say, this is what we want this business unit to do? But it sounds like you're saying top down first, crowdsource it to the top, but then, bottom up first. And then you have a leadership review, and then they kind of approve. Like, is that the right? So when you see like gather use cases that everyone's using, so I guess they have to have been doing stuff, having given permission first to experiment. Is that correct?
I think what I've really seen with AI is this, it's really two directional. Like, it really is two directional. It can't just be top down, because I do think sometimes leaders are, separated from what is happening on the ground. And sometimes that can create unrealistic expectations for what adoption should look like or what sort of results should look like. At the same time, I think if you don't have the top-down approval or, will to experiment, then people get concerned. They sort of feel like, well, do I actually have ownership to change this process? Do I have ownership to, re-architect, the way that we've been doing things before with this new tool? So I do think you need those two things working in concert. So when I'm, requirements gathering or thinking through use cases, I like to have both approaches playing at the same time. I like to create very much a co-creation environment so that leadership team can actually listen and have an opportunity, like in-person opportunities, to hear how people are using those tools on the ground. And so one of the tactics I really like using, it's actually just in-person discovery workshops. So part of change management, you obviously have to offer people training.
As to how you keep that cycle going.
You need to be continuously working through, because it is shifting all the time. The pace of change, it is not in the past where, you would deploy something, you would do the post-deployment activities, and then there would be like a sort of status quo or like a new status quo that you would sort of see and sort of crystallize.
For the next 5 years, let's just like watch.
No.
Yeah. Okay.
So this is continuous. The pace of change is unlike anything that I have seen in the last 12 years. So not only are new products and solutions coming to market regularly, that's forcing you to sort of reevaluate and question decisions, but the pace of change in terms of capability development and upskilling for staff members as well means that you really do need to keep on top of that. And the only way to do that is to continuously have these conversations, continuously benchmark, continuously measure. And this is why I say you need to have that visibility and that transparency of how it is actually being used in your environment. Because if you don't have that, you cannot measure, you cannot track. So I really do think that's fundamental.
Quick tangent on, like, again, the pace of development. We obviously all hear this a lot. On net, like, what is your read on like the pulse? Is there more excitement or fatigue? The fact that, oh no, like we can do so much, or oh no, we have to find out how much we can do every 6 months. What is your read on it? I guess at every level, both like individual contributors to the boardroom.
I think at the board level, what I was seeing, even sort of 6 to 12 months ago, was people were, interested in hearing what was happening. What are you doing? What are you doing in the space? Now, that is no longer the question. It is, what results are you getting? So I think those times have well and truly changed. People are interested in impact. So I do think the focus is shifting. So I would say at the start, maybe sort of two to 3 years ago, the way that we were seeing, AI and LLMs being deployed was very much at this horizontal. So it was very much the individual productivity use case. And I think there was a lot of pressure, but the focus was more on the individual to come up with, ways that it was going to support them and improve them. And in some ways, the individual was taking on the risk and having to ensure that they were following, the AI acceptable use policy, and all these sort of things. Now, I think the market has matured to a place where we're now really thinking more along the lines of the verticals. And it's not just about, well, how is the individual changing the way that they work, but how are we re-architecting entire processes for value? Because you can apply to AI to like parts of the process, and that will take you so far. You may incrementally find some value, but you're not going to find transformative value. So the spaces where you're going to see that often is by reworking a process entirely. So I think in terms of change fatigue,
versus excitement, oh wow, we can improve in every 6 months.
And just a sort of thing I want to drive home is that people, sometimes I think leadership teams think that if they just put these tools into the hands of people, that they're going to use them. And I think one of the biggest misconceptions, and sort of coming back to the change management piece, is you actually have to work at adoption. Sort of like the Peloton bike that's sitting in someone's living room post-COVID. Like, just because you bought it doesn't mean that you are actually using it or that people are going to use it. So yeah, it is something, it's a muscle you need to keep working.
You mentioned that, governance, if you will, has a bit of a bad rep as to like being a bit of a buzzkill in what could be achieved, if you will. So I'm wondering if you had any anecdotes or real world examples of where effective governance has actually unlocked innovation in the AI context or any other.
I would say yes. I have seen some use cases where it has unlocked innovation and advantage. So this example doesn't come from L.E.K, but there was an organization I'm familiar with who've completed their ISO 42001 certification, and the rigor and the process of going through that. So they did some of the things I mentioned, cataloged their AI use cases, created transparency around that, created alignment with their leadership team. And through doing those activities, they were able to double down on those areas where they were seeing value. So for example, they had used AI tools within their sales process. So think drafting proposals, recording conversations with potential clients, using those notes to develop proposals, more effectively, faster. And so what they found was that the acceptance rate, not just output of proposal, but acceptance rates of proposals had actually increased 10 to 12% since they had enabled those sales processes with AI. What there is not a lot of is responsible AI or trustworthy AI. And I think what clients are going to be looking for is sort of brand, trust, reputation. And people are going to end up having to lean on things like ISO to demonstrate that to the market and to demonstrate that they've actually got those processes and that governance in place. So I do think it will become a strategic differentiator.
Again, from bird's eye view, what would you say has changed versus stayed the same in consulting since the introduction of Gen AI? So we'll start with in your personal, like everything from I used to spend 5 more minutes drafting email responses versus not. And then we'll go to consulting as a practice itself. So let's start with yourself. Yeah. Which change stay the same?
Personally, for me, I think it has been incredible.
Yes. So change and stayed the same.
Yeah. So what stayed the same, I think, is just knowing how to ask the right questions. Okay. So fundamentally, great advisors have the ability to diagnose problems, and the frameworks, the questions that they're asking themselves, how they're going about solving something really is what differentiates. And I think now with these AI solutions, actually, if you're asking the wrong questions, it's going to become really apparent that you're going towards a solution that actually doesn't work. Right. So actually, I think the risks of amplifying, faulty thinking increase. So people who are actually able to contextualize and create hypotheses and problem statements that truly diagnose issues for clients, that is always going to stay
It's always
relevant.
invaluable. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think the other piece of it is just sort of stakeholder engagement and stakeholder management. I think, AI has changed the tactics. So I think you can get to a fact base faster. I think you can get to production outputs like, PowerPoint decks or different sorts of outputs faster. So videos that tell a strategic story or a transformation journey. But it doesn't matter how good your deck is, you need to be able to influence your client. You need to be able
it's
to
still people on the other side of it. Yeah.
Whether it's the CEO, the CFO, the board. And so prompts are not going to help you there. Like, you need to be able to respond to that in real time. And so I think if this opens up the opportunity for particularly consultants at the lower level to take on more leadership responsibilities, more opportunities to engage and practice those core human skills, and perhaps, again, being enabled with AI, like AI coaching, like that's fine. But to really practice those human skills, I think that is what is going to set people apart.
Yeah, I think as more of the bots coming, the more human parts of the equation become more important. To your point from before, like, well, so I think synthesis is your personal takeaways like are the same as like for the practice as a whole. That's a fantastic place to close here. Thank you so much for finding the time. This was amazing.
Thank you so much for having me.